Now let's do an example where we actually use the reference angle to evaluate cosine of an angle and sine of an angle. Now, in general, if you have some angle and you need to find the cosine and sine of that angle, then if that angle has a reference angle for which you know the terminal point, so if the reference angle is pi over 6, pi over 4, or pi over 3, if the reference angle happens to be one of these three, you'll be able to use this reference angle technique to evaluate cosine t, to evaluate sine t, and also to find the terminal point in general of the angle that you're working with, in this case 7 pi over 6. If the reference angle is not an angle that you know the terminal point of, then you won't necessarily be able to use this technique. So when you're given an angle, in this case 7 pi over 6, if you want to know the terminal point of this angle, first you can find the reference angle. Then you can use that fact that we talked about earlier. That is, the terminal point for t will be the terminal point of the reference angle, t prime, except you may have to adjust the sign. So the SIGN sign, not the SINE sign. And you'll have to adjust the sign, SIGN sign, based on the quadrant. Based on what quadrant t lies in. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So no matter what, we have to find the reference angle t prime. So in order to find the reference angle t prime, we have a few steps. The first step is we have to make sure we're working with an angle that's between 0 and 2 pi. In fact, 7 pi over 6 is less than 2 pi, since 2 pi is multiplying by 6 over 6, 12 pi over 6. So our angle is between 0 and 2 pi. We don't have to add or subtract 2 pi from it. Next, when figuring out the reference angle, we have to establish what quadrant this is in. So 7 is a little bit larger than 6. So 7 pi over 6 is going to be a little bit larger than pi. So that makes me think that this is going to be in quadrant 3. Let's check. So is 7 pi over 6 larger than pi? Well, yes, because pi is 6 pi over 6. And how does it compare to 3 pi over 2? Well, I can get a common denominator, 9 pi over 6, and 7 pi over 6 is less than 9 pi over 6, so indeed we are in quadrant 3. Then we draw a picture of an angle in quadrant 3. Here's my unit circle. Here's an angle in quadrant 3. That is t. And my reference angle is this angle between the x-axis and my terminal side. And in order to develop an equation for the reference angle, I note that if I go around by pi, and then I go further a little bit more by the reference angle, I get the terminal side. I get to the terminal side of t. And so if I want to know the reference angle, t prime, that would be t minus pi. And what is t? T is 7 pi over 8. So this would be pi over 8. Oh, I don't know why I thought this was pi over 8. This is 7 pi over 6, not 7 pi over 8. So it's pi over 6. So that is the work to figure out the reference angle. So we did that, and now we'll do the second part. To find the terminal point for 7 pi over 6, well, the terminal point for 7 pi over 6 In order to find that out, I'm first going to write down what the terminal point for the reference angle is. So the terminal point for t prime, which is pi over 6, is root 3 over 2, comma 1/2. And once you establish what the terminal point for the reference angle is, then the terminal point for t, it's going to be the exact same as the terminal point for the reference angle, except you'll have this plus or minus here, which you'll have to choose plus or minus based on the quadrant. This is what will happen every time. If you figure out what the reference angle is, then you write down what the terminal point for that reference angle is, and then the terminal point for your original question will be plus or minus the terminal point of the reference angle. Now, 7 pi over 6 is in quadrant 3. If you think about visualizing quadrant 3, both the x and the y coordinates in quadrant 3 are negative, and so I'll choose negative, negative. And thus the terminal point for 7 pi over 6 is negative root 3 over 2, comma, negative 1/2. And then we can finally answer the question of what is cosine of 7 pi over 6 and what is sine of 7 pi over 6. So cosine is just going to be the x-coordinate of the terminal point, so minus root 3 over 2. And sine of 7 pi over 6, that's just going to be the y-coordinate, which is negative 1/2.